Welcome to Cwrs Fochno, or Borth Bog. Over to my left is Borth, Innislas in front of me, and the Dyfi estuary stretching away up towards Machynlleth to my right. I'm surrounded here by one of the largest and most natural peatlands of its type in Western Europe. A really important site for nature conservation, really important carbon store, and also a fascinating site in terms of the historical development and the archaeology. Beneath my feet here is 7 metres of peat, which is an incredible archive of the environmental history. We've got a continuous record of the development of the bog and the local environment stretching back to 7,000 years ago when the bog started to form. As a result of this unique archive, the site has become extremely important in recent years for scientific research, and particularly investigations into how carbon is cycled between the bog and the atmosphere. For 7,000 years or so, the bog has been actively growing, accumulating peat. The main peat form is this plant here, which is bog moss or sphagnum. It's a remarkable plant. It can store huge amounts of water and it gets all its nutrients from rainfall. So the bog is totally dependent on rainfall and would change greatly if you add nutrients from other sources. Until roughly 2 centuries ago, the bog had grown and developed naturally, and then along came the Victorians and decided that this was just wasteland in need of reclamation. So there have been big changes in the last 200 years and attempts to drain the bog. Fortunately, the centre of the bog has remained waterlogged and actively growing, but all around the margins have been reclamation, ditches cut to drain the peat and try and reclaim areas for agriculture. Management of this site revolves around trying to keep it wet. Bogs will only carry on growing peat and support their incredibly sensitive wildlife if the surface remains waterlogged. So management's directed to trying to restore the hydrology to keep the rainfall in the bog. So most of the time we've been, over the last 10 or 20 years, trying to block the ditches that have been cut in the past to restore the water table. The ditches themselves have now become a haven for otters, for dragonflies, for birds such as the teal and redshank. Some of our most notable species are things like the large heath butterfly, the rosy marsh moth, which was thought to be extinct in Britain for well over a century. Other things include the bog bush cricket, the raft spider. We're standing here now on the northern side of Cwrs Fochno, an area called Llancanfelyn Common, which is an area of old peat cuttings. For centuries, local people in the area derive most of their domestic fuel from cutting peat. They cut the peat in the summer, allow it to dry, and use it for the domestic heating and cooking until the widespread availability of coal. So it carried on for centuries up until the Second World War. And here we can see distinct trenches where the peat was cut and it was stacked on the drier ridges in between. Bogs preserve their own history, and going back further in time we can see additional evidence of man's activities in the area. If you look to the far hillside there was a Roman settlement on the hillside. Below that, at the edge of the bog recently, an old trackway was discovered dating back to medieval times, and on the hillside, at the foot of the hill beside the trackway, is evidence of smelting dating back to Roman times. And we know that metalwork and metallurgy was important in the area dating back further than that, because archaeologists have found evidence of metalwork in the soil beneath the bog dating back to the Bronze Age 7,000 years ago, to a time when the bog hadn't even started to form. But throughout the peat column, any evidence of from pollen grains and from ash but anything else that fell into the bog would have been preserved. So a lot of evidence potentially of man's activities, and certainly in this ancient trackway which was laid over 1,000 years ago, the timbers are mostly very well preserved in the waterlogged peat. Until around 200 years ago, of course, Fochno was considerably more extensive than it is now, stretching as a wetland, peats and intertidal flats all the way up to Dyfi.